My eyes widened in disbelief, scanning the sea of unexpected vehicles. It was a kaleidoscope of cars, trucks, and SUVs, all neatly parked across my sprawling warehouse floor. This was my sanctuary, a place where dreams of innovation took flight, now transformed into an unauthorized parking lot. Rage bubbled within me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of determination. I wouldn't let this slide. With a resolute nod, I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the towing company. Every single car would be gone by morning. What would happen when the owners returned to an empty lot? It all began innocently enough, a simple dream taking root in the heart of Maple Creek, a town known for its quaint charm and tight-knit community. I, Alex, had always been drawn to creation, to the satisfaction of building something from the ground up. My dream wasn't about fancy cars or grand mansions. It was about a space where ideas could flourish, a place where people could come together to learn, grow, and help each other. I envisioned a community workshop, a place where anyone, regardless of age or experience, could come to tinker, to create, to fix. It would be a haven for aspiring inventors, a classroom for curious minds, and a repair shop for those who couldn't afford expensive fixes. I had poured my life savings into purchasing the old, dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a colossal undertaking, a true fixer-upper that most people would have dismissed as a lost cause. The roof leaked like a sieve, the windows were shattered, and the interior was a chaotic mess of forgotten machinery and years of dust. But I saw past the grime and decay, I saw potential, a canvas for my vision. Friends and family thought I was crazy. "Alex, why a warehouse?" my Aunt Carol would often ask, her brow furrowed with concern. "Wouldn't a small shop be enough?" But I knew what I wanted. I wanted a space big enough to host multiple projects at once, a place where different skills could intertwine and inspire new ideas. I wanted a place that felt open and welcoming, not cramped and exclusive. The first few months were a blur of sweat and sawdust. My days began at dawn and often stretched late into the night. I patched the roof, replaced the windows, and painstakingly cleared out decades of junk. My hands were perpetually sore, my muscles ached, but every repaired pane of glass, every fresh coat of paint, filled me with a quiet joy. Neighbors, initially curious, soon started to offer help. Mr. Henderson, a retired carpenter with hands like gnarled oak, showed me how to properly reinforce the wooden beams. Mrs. Gable, known for her delicious apple pies, would bring me fresh batches of cookies and iced tea, a welcome respite from the grueling work. These small acts of kindness fueled my spirit, reminding me that even in a seemingly solitary endeavor, community was always present. One particularly sweltering afternoon, while wrestling with a stubborn section of flooring, a young girl named Lily, no older than 10, timidly approached the open warehouse door. She held a broken toy robot, its wires dangling forlornly. "Excuse me, sir," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. "My robot is broken. Can you fix it?" I wiped sweat from my brow, a smile spreading across my grimy face. "Come on in, Lily," I said, gesturing to a workbench I was setting up. "Let's see what we can do." Together, we carefully examined the robot. I showed her how to strip the wires, how to solder them back together. Her eyes, wide with concentration, followed every move. When the robot whirred back to life, Lily's face lit up with a joy that was more rewarding than any paycheck. That moment solidified my resolve. This workshop would be a place of learning, of empowerment. As the warehouse slowly transformed, so did my plans. I started reaching out to local schools, offering free workshops for kids on basic electronics and woodworking. The response was overwhelming. Parents, eager for engaging and educational activities for their children, signed them up in droves. Soon, the rhythmic hum of power tools and the cheerful chatter of children filled the air. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. Then came the letters. Official-looking envelopes, emblazoned with the stern logo of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. I lived a few blocks away, in a small house that was part of the HOA's jurisdiction, but the warehouse was outside their official boundaries, or so I thought. The first letter was a polite, albeit firm, request to cease and desist any commercial activities in what they deemed a residential zone. I scoffed. The warehouse was zoned for light industrial use. It had been for decades. I ignored it, figuring it was a mistake. The letters grew increasingly aggressive. They cited noise disturbances, increased traffic, and even unsightly appearances, despite the fact that I had meticulously cleaned and restored the building. I tried to reason with them, attending a heated HOA meeting where I explained my vision for the community workshop. Most residents seemed supportive, even enthusiastic, about the positive impact it was having. But one woman, a formidable presence with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an unyielding gaze, remained unmoved. Her name was Deborah, but everyone knew her as Karen. She chaired the HOA board and wielded her power like a finely sharpened sword. "Mr. Peterson," she declared, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the room, "while your intentions may be noble, this is a residential area. We cannot tolerate commercial enterprises that disrupt the peace and quiet of our neighborhood." I patiently explained that the warehouse was not in the residential zone, that it was a community initiative, not a profit-driven business. I showed them my permits, my zoning documents. Karen merely waved a dismissive hand. "Technicalities, Mr. Peterson. The spirit of the law is clear. We expect our residents to maintain the decorum of this community." The warnings escalated to threats of fines, then legal action. I consulted a lawyer, who assured me I was well within my rights. The zoning was clear. The HOA was overstepping their authority. Armed with this legal reassurance, I continued with my workshops, refusing to be intimidated. I believed in what I was doing, and the smiling faces of the kids who came to learn reinforced my conviction. One Saturday morning, as I was setting up for a woodworking class, I noticed a flurry of activity outside the warehouse. Cars, more cars than I had ever seen on my quiet street, were circling like vultures. Then, one by one, they started pulling into my parking lot. Not just the small lot I had designated for visitors, but directly onto the open space inside the warehouse. Drivers, mostly well-dressed adults, emerged from their vehicles, some with golf clubs, others with shopping bags. They acted as if this was perfectly normal, strolling past me without a second glance. I stood there, dumbfounded, as my once sacred space became a chaotic parking lot. I approached a woman who was casually locking her luxury SUV near my workbench. "Excuse me," I began, trying to keep my voice even, "this is private property. You can't park here." She turned, her expression one of utter disdain. "Oh, calm down, dear. Deborah told us it was perfectly fine to park here for the neighborhood bake sale. She said you wouldn't mind." My jaw dropped. Deborah. Karen. She had deliberately turned my warehouse into an overflow parking lot for a neighborhood event. The audacity was astounding. This wasn't just an overstep, it was a hostile takeover. My blood ran cold, a quiet fury beginning to simmer beneath the surface. I looked around at my desecrated space, the careful order I had established now swallowed by a sea of unfamiliar vehicles. The peaceful hum of my workshop was replaced by the clatter of car doors and the chatter of strangers. This was a direct attack, a blatant disregard for my property and my hard work. I knew then that I couldn't just let this go. I wouldn't. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Deborah, Karen, had orchestrated this invasion, turning my dream into a public parking lot. The casual arrogance of the woman who had just brushed me off ignited a slow-burning fire within me. This wasn't just about parking, it was about disrespect, about a complete disregard for my rights and my efforts. My initial shock quickly morphed into a steely resolve. I would not stand by and let my hard work be trampled upon. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the keypad as I searched for local towing services. It was time to clear out the unwanted guests. I found Quick Tow Incorporated, a 24/7 service with decent reviews. The dispatcher, a gruff but efficient man named Frank, listened patiently as I explained the situation. He seemed a little surprised by the sheer number of vehicles I wanted removed, but he assured me they could handle it. "We'll have a team there within the hour, sir," he stated, his voice professional. "Just confirm you're the property owner and have the necessary documentation ready." I confirmed, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and grim satisfaction. This was it. While I waited, I moved methodically through the warehouse, securing anything valuable. I covered my workbenches, tucked away tools, and pulled tarps over ongoing projects. The sight of these cars, sitting brazenly on my meticulously cleaned floors, felt like a personal insult. Children's laughter from the bake sale drifted in through the open doors, a stark contrast to the churning anger in my gut. I saw Lily, the little girl whose robot I had fixed, peeking in. She waved shyly, a cupcake smudge on her cheek. I managed a weak smile, not wanting her to sense the turmoil within me. How could someone be so thoughtless, so destructive, to a space that was bringing so much good to the community? Suddenly, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside, and a woman stepped out, impeccably dressed, her blonde hair perfectly styled. It was Deborah. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the parked cars inside my warehouse, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She spotted me standing amidst the vehicles. Well, Mr. Peterson," she purred, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness as she approached the open doorway. "It seems my little suggestion worked out quite well. Such a spacious area you have here. Perfect for overflow parking, wouldn't you agree?" I met her gaze, my voice surprisingly calm despite the raging storm inside. "This is private property, Deborah. You had no right to tell people to park here." She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alex. It's just for a few hours. The bake sale is a very important community event. Besides, you're not actually using all this space, are you? It's just sitting empty." Her words were like gasoline on the fire. "It's not empty, Deborah. This is my workshop. This is where I teach kids, where I work on projects that help people. It's not a public parking lot for your convenience." Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold glare. "Listen, Mr. Peterson, you've been a nuisance ever since you moved into this neighborhood. All that noise, all those strange people coming and going. We, the HOA, are simply taking measures to ensure the peace and order of Maple Creek. Consider this a lesson." "A lesson?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think destroying my property is a lesson?" "It's not destruction," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "It's utilization. And if you don't like it, perhaps you should consider selling this building, and moving somewhere more appropriate for your, shall we say, eccentric activities." Her audacity was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she was in the right, that her convenience outweighed my property rights and my community efforts. Just then, the distant rumble of large engines grew louder. Deborah frowned, looking over my shoulder. Two massive tow trucks, their lights flashing, pulled into view, followed by a third, smaller one. Deborah's eyes widened, her smug expression replaced by a look of dawning horror. "What in the world?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the approaching vehicles. The lead tow truck, a behemoth of steel and hydraulics, slowly pulled up to my warehouse entrance. Frank, the dispatcher, hopped out, clipboard in hand. "Alex Peterson?" he asked, extending his hand. "Frank from Quick Tow. We're ready to get started." I shook his hand firmly, a faint smile touching my lips as I watched Deborah's face drain of color. "That's right, Frank. Let's clear this lot. Deborah spun around, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. You wouldn't dare, she shrieked, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to quiver with indignation. You can't tow all these cars. These are residents' vehicles. My car is in there. Frank, unfazed, merely glanced at her. Ma'am, this is private property. The owner has requested all unauthorized vehicles be removed. But I gave them permission. Deborah insisted, her voice growing shrill. I'm the head of the HOA. Doesn't matter, ma'am, Frank stated, gesturing to his team. Only the property owner can authorize parking here. And he wants these cars gone. The tow truck drivers, seasoned professionals, began their work with practiced efficiency. They moved with a calm determination, quickly hooking up the first car, a gleaming red sedan, its owner blissfully unaware inside the community hall. The hydraulics whirred, lifting the front wheels off the ground. Deborah rushed forward, her hands flailing. Stop. You can't do this. This is an outrage. I simply watched, a sense of cold, hard satisfaction settling in my chest. The first car was slowly pulled out of the warehouse, its tires screeching softly as it was maneuvered onto the street. Deborah turned to me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and desperation. You will regret this, Alex Peterson, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I met her gaze evenly. And you, Deborah, have no idea who you're dealing with either. This isn't just a building, it's a dream. And I'm not going to let anyone destroy it. As the second tow truck began to hook up another vehicle, a wave of worried murmurs started to spread through the small crowd of residents emerging from the community hall, drawn by the commotion and the sight of flashing lights. Questions began to ripple through the air. What's happening? Whose car is that? Are they really towing cars from here? The oblivious chatter of the bake sale was quickly replaced by a growing sense of panic as more and more people realized their vehicles were being removed. The serene atmosphere of the afternoon was shattered, replaced by a rising tide of confusion and anger, all directed at the sight of their cars being towed away from what they thought was an approved parking spot. What would happen when they discovered who was truly behind this chaotic scene? The sight of the tow trucks relentlessly removing vehicles from my warehouse sent a ripple of bewildered murmurs through the crowd. Faces, initially beaming from bake sale treats, contorted with confusion and then outrage. A man, mid-bite on a sugar cookie, choked as he saw his minivan being hoisted onto a flatbed. My car. What's going on? He bellowed, dropping his cookie. Panic began to spread like wildfire. Deborah, a portrait of fury, stalked through the bewildered onlookers, her voice cutting through the rising clamor. It's him. Alex Peterson. He's towing all your cars, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. A tide of angry faces turned towards me. Is this true, Alex? Someone yelled. Why are you doing this? Another demanded, her voice laced with betrayal. Their anger, fueled by Deborah's accusations and their own inconvenience, was palpable. I stood firm, taking a deep breath. This is my private property, I stated, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the din. Deborah told you all to park here without my permission. This is my workshop, not a public parking lot. But Deborah said it was fine, a woman cried, her eyes wide with disbelief as her small sedan was secured by a tow truck. She's the HOA president. We trusted her. Deborah seized the opportunity, stepping forward with a theatrical flourish. He's just being spiteful. This man has been a menace to our community, constantly making noise, bringing strangers into our quiet neighborhood. She gestured wildly towards the still-working tow trucks. He's punishing us for having a successful community event. The crowd's anger intensified. I could see the confusion warring with their frustration. They trusted Deborah, their HOA president. My attempts to explain seemed to fall on deaf ears amidst the rising chaos. One particularly agitated man, his face beet red, shoved his way to the front. "You can't do this, buddy. This is outrageous. I'm going to call the police." "Go right ahead," I calmly responded, though my heart was pounding. "I've already consulted with my lawyer. This is trespassing on private property." Just as the argument threatened to spiral into something worse, a wail erupted from the back of the crowd. A young woman, tears streaming down her face, pointed at a tow truck pulling away with a small, dented blue car. "That's my car. My baby's car seat is in there. How am I going to get him home from daycare?" Her distress was raw, immediate, and it momentarily silenced the angry shouts. The sheer inconvenience and potential hardship caused by Deborah's reckless actions suddenly became very real, very personal. It wasn't just about parking anymore, it was about lives disrupted. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a renewed sense of anger at Deborah. She had put these people in this impossible situation. Deborah, seeing the shifting mood, quickly interjected. "He's heartless. Look what he's doing to our neighbors." I stepped forward. "I understand this is difficult," I said, addressing the young mother directly. "But this wouldn't be happening if your car hadn't been parked on my private property without permission. The towing company will provide you with information on where to retrieve your vehicle." My voice was firm, but I made sure it carried a hint of regret for her specific predicament. The commotion eventually drew the attention of Officer Miller, a local police officer who had been directing traffic a few blocks away. He arrived, siren wailing briefly, to find a chaotic scene, tow trucks actively removing cars, a furious Deborah gesticulating wildly, and a large group of angry residents. Officer Miller, a man known for his calm demeanor, quickly assessed the situation. He recognized me and Deborah from previous, albeit minor, HOA disputes. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice firm but not accusatory. Deborah immediately launched into a dramatic retelling, painting me as the villain. "Officer, this man is illegally towing all our cars. He's disrupted a community event and is causing distress to all these innocent people." Officer Miller turned to me, his gaze steady. "Mr. Peterson, can you explain this?" I calmly presented my documentation, the deed to the warehouse, the zoning permits, and the legal letter from my lawyer confirming my right to remove trespassers. "Officer, this is my private property. Deborah, as the HOA president, instructed residents to park inside my warehouse without my consent. These vehicles are trespassing. I have hired a licensed towing company to remove them." Officer Miller meticulously reviewed my documents, then glanced at Deborah, whose face was now a fascinating shade of purple. He then turned to Frank, the tow truck dispatcher, who confirmed the details. After a few minutes of quiet deliberation, Officer Miller nodded. "Mr. Peterson is within his legal rights," he announced to the stunned crowd. "This is private property. If your vehicle was parked inside, it was trespassing. The towing company is operating legally." A gasp went through the crowd. Their anger, initially directed at me, began to subtly shift. Whispers of "Deborah told us to," and "she said it was fine," started to become louder, tinged with accusations. Deborah, realizing the tide was turning, tried to regain control. "But officer, this is an act of malice. He could have just asked us to move them." Officer Miller raised a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, Mr. Peterson clearly stated he had attempted to communicate his concerns previously. Regardless, the law is clear. Private property rights are absolute. You, as the organizer, bear responsibility for directing people to park on private land without permission." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. The realization that Deborah had misled them, that their cars were being towed because of her actions, began to sink in. Their frustration slowly morphed into resentment towards the HOA president. As the last car was hoisted onto a tow truck, a palpable tension settled over the scene. The once lively atmosphere of the bake sale was replaced by the solemn quiet of disgruntled residents making phone calls, trying to figure out how to retrieve their vehicles from the impound lot. Deborah stood isolated, her earlier triumph completely shattered, her face a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. She glared at me, a silent promise of future retaliation in her eyes. I knew this was far from over. This incident, while a victory for my property rights, had irrevocably altered my relationship with the HOA and, more specifically, with Deborah. The community, once supportive, was now fractured by anger and confusion, and I wondered what extreme event Deborah would orchestrate next. The aftermath of the great towaway was a strange, unsettling quiet. The bake sale had dissolved into hurried whispers and the frantic tapping of phone screens as residents arranged rides to the impound lot. Deborah, humiliated but not defeated, had retreated with a final, searing glare that promised future retribution. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a fragile peace that felt like the calm before another storm. I spent the rest of the day meticulously checking the warehouse for any damage from the impromptu parking. Thankfully, beyond a few scuff marks, everything seemed intact. The scent of car exhaust lingered, a stark reminder of the invasion. The following days were a period of uneasy truce. No more official letters from the HOA arrived, but the silence felt more menacing than any threat. I knew Deborah wouldn't let this slide. Her pride had been wounded publicly, and her power challenged. I found myself glancing nervously at the street outside my workshop, half expecting to see her black SUV pull up at any moment. The incident had created a divide in the community. Some residents, those who had witnessed Officer Miller's clear explanation, started to understand my side of the story. A few even stopped by, sheepishly apologizing and offering small gestures of goodwill, like a homemade casserole or a bag of fresh apples. They expressed sympathy for the trouble Deborah had caused and admitted they felt misled. This small show of understanding was a welcome balm, a reminder that not everyone was against me. However, a significant portion of the community, likely those who hadn't been present during the towing, or who were firmly in Deborah's camp, remained hostile. I felt their glares when I walked down the street, heard whispers cease when I approached. My once friendly interactions with some neighbors became stiff and awkward. The community workshop, usually a bustling hub of activity, saw a dip in attendance. Parents, perhaps wary of getting caught in the crossfire of an HOA dispute, kept their children home. This hurt the most. My dream was to create a space for everyone, and now it was becoming a casualty of a power struggle. One afternoon, a few weeks after the towing incident, I received a cryptic text message from an unknown number. It simply read, "They're planning something. Be careful. A friend." My blood ran cold. My mind immediately jumped to Deborah. This was it. The other shoe was about to drop. I spent the rest of the day on edge, my imagination conjuring up a multitude of nefarious plots. Would she try to get my permits revoked? Fabricate complaints? I reinforced the locks on the warehouse doors, installed new security cameras, and even considered boarding up the windows. The sense of paranoia was exhausting. The next morning, I woke to a peculiar silence. Usually, the first sounds of the day were the chirping of birds and the distant rumble of the school bus. Today, there was nothing. I walked out my front door and gasped. My entire street, and indeed, every street leading to my warehouse, was completely blocked off. Not by construction, not by an accident, but by a strategically placed line of giant, overflowing dumpsters, seemingly dropped from the sky overnight. Each one was overflowing with various kinds of waste, construction debris, old furniture, bags of what looked like household garbage. They formed an impenetrable barrier, effectively cutting off all access to my workshop. A small group of residents had gathered at the edge of the blockade, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. "What in the world is going on?" one man muttered. "I can't even get my car out." Then I saw her. Deborah, standing triumphantly by the largest dumpster, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. She was talking animatedly on her phone, occasionally glancing in my direction with a triumphant smirk. This was her doing. She had orchestrated this audacious act of obstruction, transforming the streets into an impassable maze of refuse. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a calculated siege, an attempt to isolate my workshop and choke off its lifeblood, access. The message was clear. If she couldn't get me out, she would make sure no one else could get in. The extreme event I had feared had arrived, and it was even more brazen than I could have imagined. The sight of the dumpsters, a crude, odorous wall blocking my street, sent a jolt of disbelief through me. This wasn't just petty, it was an act of outright aggression. Deborah had taken her vendetta to a whole new level, turning my quiet street into a garbage dump. My neighbors, already frustrated, were now genuinely stranded, unable to leave their driveways. I could hear their angry shouts, their car horns blaring in futility. Deborah, still on her phone, seemed to revel in the chaos she had created. Her face was alight with a smug satisfaction that twisted my stomach. I stomped over to the edge of the nearest dumpster, its stench assaulting my nostrils. "Deborah, what is the meaning of this?" I demanded, my voice tight with controlled fury. She finally ended her call, turning to face me with a triumphant smirk. "Meaning, Mr. Peterson? It means the HOA has decided to implement a new community beautification project. We're cleaning up the neighborhood, one unsightly street at a time." Her eyes glinted with malicious pleasure. "And unfortunately, your little workshop seems to be in the way of progress. This isn't beautification, this is obstruction." I countered, gesturing to the impassable street. "You've blocked off an entire neighborhood." "Minor inconvenience for the greater good," she chirped, completely unfazed. "Besides, if your patrons can't get to your loud, disruptive workshop, perhaps we'll finally have some peace and quiet around here." She winked, a cruel gesture that made my blood boil. "Consider it a gentle nudge to reconsider your business model." The brazenness of her actions was staggering. She wasn't even trying to hide her motive. This was a direct assault on my livelihood, a deliberate attempt to cut off access to my workshop and starve it of its purpose. My mind raced, trying to figure out a way around this insurmountable obstacle. The dumpsters were massive, too heavy to move alone, and strategically placed to block every possible vehicle route. Even walking through the narrow gaps between them was a challenge, forcing me to navigate around overflowing trash. As the morning wore on, the situation only worsened. Delivery trucks couldn't reach their destinations, parents struggled to get their children to school, and essential services like garbage collection were completely disrupted. The collective frustration of the residents grew, and this time, much of it was directed squarely at Deborah. People started yelling at her, demanding answers, but she simply shrugged them off, claiming it was for the good of the community and that some sacrifices had to be made. Her unwavering conviction in her own righteousness was chilling. I knew I couldn't just stand by. I called Officer Miller again, explaining the new blockade. He sounded tired but promised to send someone to investigate. A few hours later, a different officer arrived, a younger, less experienced one. He looked overwhelmed by the scene, scratching his head as he surveyed the endless line of dumpsters. He spoke with Deborah, who calmly explained her beautification project, twisting the narrative to make it sound like a legitimate, if ambitious, community effort. The officer seemed hesitant, unsure how to proceed. It was clearly a nuisance, but was it illegal? He told me he'd look into it and left, leaving the dumpsters exactly where they were. A sense of despair began to creep in. It felt like an unwinnable battle. Deborah held all the cards. She controlled the HOA, she had the ear of some residents, and she knew how to exploit loopholes to cause maximum disruption without outright breaking a clear law. How could I run a community workshop if no one could even reach it? The inspiring message of kindness and empathy I wanted to share felt utterly lost in this escalating feud. Just as I was about to succumb to utter defeat, a small figure appeared at the edge of the dumpster maze. It was Lily, the little girl from the robot incident, her small face streaked with dirt, pushing a rusty old wagon. Behind her, slowly emerging from between two dumpsters, were several other children, some carrying small toolboxes, others with drawings clutched in their hands. They had evidently walked, braving the stench and the cluttered path, just to get to the workshop. Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Mr. Alex," she said, her voice small but determined, "we came for the woodworking class. We figured out a way through the dumpsters." My heart swelled. Despite Deborah's grand scheme, these children, driven by their curiosity and desire to learn, had found a way. Their resilience was a stark contrast to the adult squabbling that surrounded us. It was a tiny beacon of hope in a very dark situation. I knelt down, a genuine smile replacing my grimace. "Come on in, kids," I said, gesturing to the still accessible warehouse entrance. "Let's build something amazing." As the children squeezed through the gaps in the dumpsters, their laughter echoing faintly, I noticed Deborah watching from a distance, her smug expression faltering slightly. She had expected to completely isolate me, to cut off my connection to the community. But she had underestimated the determination of a few eager young minds. It was a small victory, but it fueled a new resolve within me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was about protecting a space where curiosity could thrive, where kindness could be taught, and where children like Lily could find joy in creation, despite the obstacles. Deborah's extreme act of obstruction had failed to deter the true spirit of the workshop. However, I knew her next move would be even more insidious, something designed to undermine my efforts from the inside out. The sight of the children, bravely navigating the dumpster maze to reach the workshop, was a spark that reignited my determination. Deborah's plan to isolate me had backfired, at least with the kids. But her glare, as she watched them, promised something far more sinister than physical blockades. The following days brought an unnerving calm. The dumpsters remained, a constant, foul-smelling reminder of her power play, yet no new direct attacks occurred. This quiet, however, felt more like a lurking predator than a genuine retreat. I kept the workshop going for the few children who could make it through, their enthusiasm a lifeline in the deepening gloom. One humid afternoon, a group of stern-faced men and women arrived at my door. They wore matching polos with the HOA logo and carried clipboards, their expressions grim. Leading them, naturally, was Deborah. But this time, she wasn't just smug. She was radiating a chilling certainty. "Mr. Peterson," she began, her voice devoid of its usual playful malice, replaced by a cold, official tone. "We are here to conduct a formal inspection of your property. We have received numerous complaints regarding code violations, health hazards, and general nuisance. Under HOA bylaws, we have the right to ensure all properties within a certain radius adhere to community standards. I knew this was a fabrication. My workshop was spotless, meticulously maintained. This warehouse is outside the HOA's jurisdiction," I stated, my voice firm. "And I've had no legitimate complaints. This is harassment." Deborah merely smiled, a thin, humorless line. "Ah, but the radius has been recently redefined, Mr. Peterson. And the complaints, well, they are quite legitimate in our view. Now, if you'll step aside." Before I could fully process her audacity, the group began to spread out, fanning through my workshop. They scrutinized every corner, scribbling notes on their clipboards. One woman, with an exaggerated sniff, pointed to a small pile of sawdust near a workbench. "Health hazard. Allergens," she declared dramatically. Another tapped a power outlet. "Unsecured wiring. Fire hazard." They were inventing violations, manufacturing evidence out of thin air. It was a kangaroo court on my own property. Deborah watched, a satisfied gleam in her eyes, as they picked apart my carefully built dream. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and helplessness. This wasn't about right or wrong, it was about power, about Deborah asserting her control in the most insidious way possible. Just as I felt a wave of despair wash over me, I heard a small voice. "Mr. Alex, what are they doing?" Lily stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion, a half-finished wooden birdhouse in her hands. Behind her, a few other children peered in, their expressions mirroring Lily's. Deborah, seeing the children, pivoted instantly. Her voice softened, dripping with false concern. "Oh, dear children. We are just ensuring Mr. Peterson's workshop is safe for you. There have been concerns, you see, about the air quality, and those dangerous tools." She gestured vaguely towards my perfectly safe, child-friendly equipment. She was trying to poison the well, to sow doubt in the minds of the children and their parents. My heart sank. This was her true weapon, manipulation. She knew the power of fear, especially when it came to children. The inspecting team, emboldened by Deborah's presence, continued their sham inspection. They left a stack of ominous-looking notices on my main workbench, detailing dozens of violations, and threatening exorbitant fines and even forced closure if I didn't comply within days. That night, alone in the silent workshop, I felt truly defeated. The dumpsters were one thing, but this was a direct attack on my reputation, on the very trust one had built with the community. How could I fight fabricated claims and a biased HOA? I stared at the violation notices, each one a stab at my resolve. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled me. It was Mr. Henderson, the retired carpenter, his face etched with concern. Behind him stood Mrs. Gable, holding a plate of her famous cookies, and several other neighbors who had initially been supportive. "Alex, we heard what Deborah's doing," Mr. Henderson said, his voice gruff but kind. "We saw those HOA folks snooping around. It's not right. She's gone too far." Mrs. Gable nodded vigorously. "She's trying to scare people away, to shut you down. But we know what you do here, Alex. We see the good." A flicker of hope ignited within me. "But what can we do?" I asked, gesturing weakly to the stacks of notices. "She's got the HOA behind her, twisting everything." "Not everyone in the HOA, Alex," Mr. Henderson corrected. "Some of us are tired of her bullying." "And the rest of the neighborhood? They're furious about those dumpsters. Their anger is boiling over." Then, a surprising voice spoke up. It was Officer Miller, who had arrived quietly with the group. "Mr. Peterson," he said, holding up a small device. "After the dumpster incident, I started looking into Deborah's HOA activities more closely. I also started getting calls, a lot of them, from residents complaining about being misled, about their cars being towed, and now about these dumpsters. We've also had several actual complaints about the HOA's recent conduct, not just about your workshop." He then showed me something on his phone. It was a digital map, with a small, glowing red dot marked Maple Creek HOA boundary. And next to it, another, slightly larger, glowing green circle. "Turns out," Officer Miller continued, "the HOA's supposed expanded jurisdiction or redefined radius is completely false. It was never officially approved, and their old boundaries explicitly exclude your warehouse. Deborah fabricated those claims. She also fabricated most of the complaints against you." My jaw dropped. Fabricated complaints, a fake jurisdiction, all of it a grand deception. Furthermore, Officer Miller added, "We've received anonymous tips, backed by some solid evidence, that those dumpsters were illegally acquired and placed, bypassing city permits. And it turns out, Deborah used HOA funds to pay for them, without proper board approval." A collective gasp went through the small group of neighbors. Deborah had not only lied, but she had also misused community money for her personal vendetta. "This changes everything," I whispered, a surge of renewed strength flowing through me. Mr. Henderson slapped me on the back. It does, son. And we're not going to let her get away with it. We've got a special HOA meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. And this time, it won't be just Deborah controlling the narrative. The next evening, the community hall was packed. The air was thick with anticipation. Deborah sat at the head of the table, flanked by a few loyalists, her expression still radiating a false calm. She began the meeting, her voice smooth and confident, listing off trivial agenda items, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing. When it came time for new business, Mr. Henderson stood up, his voice booming. Madam President, I move for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership. A ripple went through the room. Deborah's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise finally breaking through her composed facade. On what grounds, Mr. Henderson? She asked, her voice sharp. Before he could answer, Officer Miller stepped forward, a stack of documents in his hand. He laid them on the table, right in front of Deborah. On the grounds of fraudulent claims, misuse of HOA funds, and deliberate obstruction of public thoroughfares, he stated, his voice clear and authoritative, as he began to present the irrefutable evidence of her deceit. The room erupted. Whispers turned to shouts, and shouts turned to angry accusations. Deborah's face, which had been so composed, crumpled. She tried to deny, to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. Neighbors, emboldened by the truth, started sharing their own stories of her manipulation and bullying. The young mother whose car was towed bravely spoke up about the distress Deborah caused. The vote of no confidence passed overwhelmingly. Within minutes, Deborah was stripped of her title, her authority crumbling around her. She fled the meeting, her head bowed, her reign of terror finally over. The community, fractured by her actions, could finally begin to heal. The dumpsters were removed the next day, and the community workshop reopened its doors, now more popular than ever, a symbol of resilience and the triumph of truth. My dream, once threatened, was now more vibrant than ever, all because a community refused to let one, Karen, turn their lives, and my warehouse, into a parking lot.